She took a simple job as a maid inside a rich man's silent mansion, expecting nothing more than cleaning rooms and avoiding trouble. But everything changed the day. The reclusive billionaire's terminally ill son, who hadn't spoken a word in years, looked her in the eyes and quietly asked if she could grant him just 3 wishes. What he said first was so pure, so unexpected, and so deeply personal that she couldn't hold back the tears. And from that moment on, her life, his life, and the heart of the entire house would never be the same again. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because you'll be surprised by the humble request the little boy made. Enjoy the story, because it will be well worth it. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We from Santos Tales love to know that. In a large and expensive mansion in the countryside of Connecticut, Edward Blake lived alone with his young son Liam. The mansion was beautiful, filled with expensive furniture, artwork, and large windows that showed the green gardens outside. But inside, it was quiet, and not in a peaceful way. It felt empty and cold. Edward was a very rich man, but he wasn't a warm father. After his wife died during Liam's birth, he stopped showing emotions. He buried himself in his work and never recovered from the pain. Liam was now 7 years old, and his life had not been easy. He had never known his mother and barely knew his father. The only thing he knew well was silence. He spent most of his time sitting in his wheelchair, looking out the window without saying a word. He never played, never laughed. The house, although full of luxury, felt lifeless. It was like a museum with no visitors and no joy. Edward never really learned how to connect with Liam. He was always busy with meetings, phone calls, and long hours away from home. When he was there, he didn't talk much to his son. He didn't know what to say. Sometimes he would stand in the doorway of Liam's room, watching him silently, and then walk away without saying anything. He didn't know how to be a father, especially to a boy who never spoke and never smiled. Liam had a quiet nature, and he was also diagnosed with a mild form of autism. He avoided eye contact, didn't like to be touched, and kept to himself most of the time. He didn't respond when people spoke to him, and he never asked for anything. The nurses and caregivers tried to take care of him, but he didn't talk to them either. He just sat there, looking out at the trees and flowers through the large glass windows that lined the mansion's walls. Recently, something even worse had happened. Liam was diagnosed with aggressive leukemia in a very advanced stage. The doctors said it was serious and that there were not many options left. Edward, even with all his money, couldn't fix it. He could buy anything in the world, cars, houses, companies, but he couldn't buy more time for his son. That fact broke him more than he showed. But instead of crying or asking for help, he just became even more distant. He hired the best doctors and nurses, bought every medicine that was available, and turned part of the mansion into a private hospital wing. Still, Liam's condition only got worse. His small body grew weaker each day. He couldn't walk anymore, which is why he had to use a wheelchair. He barely ate and often fell asleep in the middle of the day. His skin became pale and his eyes looked tired, though he never complained. Despite the help of trained medical staff, the atmosphere in the mansion remained heavy and full of sorrow. The nurses did their job professionally, but they didn't feel connected to the child. They came and went quietly, trying not to disturb the silence that had taken over the house. Edward rarely spoke to them, only giving short instructions or nods when needed. The staff was used to his cold behavior, and no one expected warmth from him anymore. Liam continued to sit by the window day after day, watching the world go by without being part of it. The garden outside was full of life, birds, squirrels, flowers blooming, but none of it reached him. He never asked to go outside, even when the weather was nice. He just stared, Sometimes he blinked slowly or tilted his head slightly, but he never smiled or spoke. To the people around him, he seemed like a ghost, trapped inside his own body, drifting further away each day. Edward spent his nights in his office, sitting behind a large desk covered in papers he didn't read. The fireplace often remained lit, even though the warmth didn't reach his heart. He sometimes looked at old photographs of his wife, remembering the life they once dreamed of. She'd been happy during the pregnancy, full of plans and excitement. Her sudden death during childbirth had changed everything. After that, Edward felt lost. He blamed himself for not being there, for not protecting her. Now, with Liam so sick and fading, he felt that same helplessness again. He didn't know how to speak to his son or how to comfort him. Whenever he stood in the same room, he felt like a stranger. The silence between them wasn't just quiet, it was like a wall. He didn't know what Liam thought or felt, and it scared him. Edward had built empires in business, but he had failed to build a bond with the only person left in his family. Even though there were expensive paintings on the walls and golden chandeliers hanging from the ceilings, the mansion felt more like a prison than a home. No visitors came. No laughter was heard. The rooms were clean and bright, but completely silent. Liam's wheelchair was always near the same window, always facing the same view. No toys were scattered on the floor, no books lay open on a bed, and no cartoons played on a television. Every day felt the same. The housekeeper walked quietly through the halls. The doctors checked Liam's condition, and Edward hid in his office. Outside, the seasons changed. Spring turned to summer, and soon the leaves would start to fall. But inside, time felt frozen. Edward sometimes paused at Liam's door, watching his son silently, and Liam continued staring out the window, never moving much, never speaking. The silence of the Blake mansion remained, unchanged and unbroken, heavy with sadness and memories that never went away. Grace Johnson arrived at the Blake mansion on a cold and cloudy morning. She was 38 years old, dressed in simple clothes, with a small suitcase in her hand. A staff member quickly showed her the house and explained her duties. Grace had been hired as a housemaid, and she was there to clean, organize, and keep things in order. She didn't ask many questions and didn't try to get involved with anyone. The house was quiet and serious. No one smiled, and everyone seemed busy or distant. Grace understood quickly that it wasn't a place for small talk or warm greetings. She just wanted to do her job and avoid problems. She had worked in many houses before, but this one felt different. There was a strange silence, not just from the people, but from the walls, the air, everything. Grace didn't know the full story behind the Blake family yet, and honestly, she didn't want to. She had her own pain to carry and didn't need more. Grace had lost her daughter, Emily, 3 years earlier. Emily was only 10 years old when she died from cancer. The illness had taken everything from her. Grace still remembered the long nights at the hospital, the quiet waiting, and the hope that kept fading. Since that day, Grace had changed. She became quieter, more serious, and often avoided getting close to people. Her daughter had been the light in her life, and when that light went out, everything else became darker. She had to keep going, though, so she worked, moved around, and stayed busy to escape the sadness. When she took the job at the Blake mansion, she thought it would be just like any other job. She would clean, stay out of trouble, and keep her head down. She didn't plan to talk to the family or become part of their lives. It was just work, and she didn't expect anything more. Her only goal was to make it through each day. In the beginning, Grace did exactly what she said she would do. She cleaned the bedrooms, washed the floors, and kept the furniture spotless. She worked quietly and carefully, trying not to draw attention. She noticed right away that the mansion wasn't just quiet, it felt empty. Not physically, since the rooms were full of beautiful things, but emotionally. The house had no warmth. The nurses walked around silently, and the man of the house, Edward Blake, hardly ever spoke. But it was the boy, Liam, who caught Grace's attention. He didn't talk or play, but she felt his eyes on her sometimes. At first, she thought she was imagining things. But soon, she realized it was real. Liam would watch her from a distance while she worked. He didn't say anything or come close, but his eyes followed her movements. There was no fear in his eyes, just quiet curiosity. Grace didn't know what to do, so she continued her work and left him alone. Day after day, Grace kept noticing Liam watching her. He would sit in his wheelchair near the hallway or by the window and stay silent, but his head would turn slightly in her direction when she passed by. Sometimes, when she was dusting the shelves or folding clothes, she would glance up and see him still looking at her. She started to feel something in those silent moments. She didn't say anything to him or to the nurses, but she felt that maybe Liam was trying to understand who she was. He didn't smile, didn't wave, but he was present. One afternoon, as she was folding bed sheets in the laundry area, she felt a soft movement behind her. She turned around and saw Liam, close this time. He didn't speak, but he held something in his hand. Slowly, he stretched out his arm and gave it to her. It was a drawing. Grace took it gently, unsure of what to expect. She looked at the drawing in her hands. It was simple, drawn with colored pencils. The lines weren't perfect, but the message was clear. It showed two figures, a woman and a child, holding hands. They were standing side by side under a sun with a blue sky. Grace felt her heart stop for a second. She stared at the picture without saying a word. Her hands began to shake slightly. Liam didn't say anything and didn't wait for a response. He just looked at her for a moment longer, then turned around and slowly rolled his wheelchair away. Grace stood there, still holding the drawing, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she let them fall quietly. She didn't cry loudly. It was the kind of silent crying that comes from deep inside. That simple drawing had touched something in her. It reminded her of Emily. It reminded her of a bond between mother and child, something she had lost. From that day on, something changed in Grace. She still did her work, still moved quietly through the mansion, but now there was something different inside her. That drawing became a sign that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. Liam hadn't said a word, but what he did was more powerful than words. She began to feel a small connection with him, something real and honest. She didn't force anything. She didn't try to talk to him or ask questions. She just kept being present, doing her job, and sometimes looking at him with gentle eyes when they passed each other. That house, full of sadness and silence, had shown a small sign of life again. Grace still carried her pain, and Liam still carried his, but for the first time, there was something shared between them. It wasn't big or dramatic, but it was real. A small bond had formed between two people who had lost someone they loved and who somehow found a quiet understanding in each other. As the days passed, Liam started following Grace around the mansion. At first, he stayed a little behind her, watching quietly while she moved from one room to another. He didn't speak or ask questions, but he was always there. When she dusted the furniture, he stayed nearby. When she cleaned the kitchen or carried laundry, he followed in his wheelchair. Sometimes, when she dropped something or needed to reach for a cloth, he would silently extend his hand and pass it to her. He never said anything, but his actions showed that he wanted to be close to her. Grace noticed this change and felt something new growing inside her. She didn't push him away. She welcomed his presence with calm gestures and soft glances. She understood that Liam wasn't just watching her out of boredom, he was searching for something. That cold, silent boy who once never moved from the window was now showing interest in the world again, starting with her. Their bond began to grow quietly day by day. Liam still didn't speak much, but his actions were louder than words. Grace started adjusting her pace to include him in her routine. If she was folding clothes, she would place some items on his lap to help. If she was organizing books, she would slide one toward him to hand her. These small exchanges became part of their daily rhythm. One afternoon, while they were alone in the hallway, Liam watched Grace picking up toys that had fallen behind a shelf. He rolled closer, picked up a piece she missed, and handed it to her. She smiled and said thank you, as she always did. Then, without warning, Liam looked at her and quietly said, "Mommy." Grace froze. Her eyes filled with tears immediately. For a few seconds, she couldn't move or speak. That one word hit deep inside her. Slowly, she leaned down, hugged him gently, and whispered, "It's okay." It was their first hug. Edward happened to be passing by at that moment. He stopped a few meters away when he saw Grace hugging Liam. He noticed the smile on Liam's face, something he hadn't seen in a long time. But instead of feeling joy, he felt uncomfortable. His expression tightened, and he stood there silently, watching without saying a word. He didn't stop them or walk away. He just observed, not knowing what to think. Grace noticed Edward in the hallway. She saw the look in his eyes, surprised, maybe even bothered, but he didn't say anything. So she held Liam a little tighter and went back to her duties. After that moment, Grace and Liam grew even closer. She began spending more time with him, not because it was part of her job, but because she wanted to. She started reading him stories in the afternoons, sitting next to him in the living room. She cooked special meals, even simple things like soup or pancakes, just to see him smile again. Liam's reactions began to change. He laughed softly during certain story moments. He clapped when he managed to finish a small puzzle. His eyes looked brighter. He began to communicate more through gestures, pointing at things he wanted or nodding when she offered something. Grace encouraged him without pressure. She always stayed calm, patient, and kind. One morning, while they were in the dining room, Grace placed a puzzle box in front of him. He hesitated at first, but slowly reached out, opened it, and started fitting the pieces. Grace sat beside him and helped with the edges. They spent almost an hour working on it. When they finished, Liam looked at her and smiled, a big, full smile. Grace smiled back, and for the first time in years, her chest felt warm again. That puzzle was more than a game. It was a sign that something inside Liam was waking up. He was starting to feel safe, seen, and cared for. As Grace continued to support Liam, the mood in the mansion slowly started to shift. The once cold and distant rooms began to feel more alive. It wasn't a big change at first, just small things. The sound of Liam's soft laughter, the smell of fresh cookies Grace baked in the kitchen, the quiet sounds of pages turning as she read aloud from his favorite books. The nurses noticed that Liam's condition, though still serious, wasn't worsening as quickly. His appetite improved slightly. He started sleeping better. Grace's presence seemed to give him peace. Edward, although still quiet and distant, began to observe more. He stood at the doors looking in, sometimes for minutes at a time. He didn't interfere, but he noticed the changes. He saw how Liam was no longer just staring out the window all day. Now, he was interacting, living. Grace didn't speak to Edward much, but she noticed he was watching, and she hoped that in time he would understand what Liam needed most wasn't medicine, but love. For Grace, all of this brought back something she thought was gone forever. After losing her daughter, she had felt empty and broken. No job or person had helped her feel whole again. But now, every time Liam smiled at her or handed her a toy to play, she felt a piece of herself returning. She didn't try to replace his mother, and she didn't expect Liam to replace her daughter, but the connection they shared was real. It came from a place of shared pain, and it slowly turned into comfort. Each day with him gave her a reason to wake up, to keep going. The mansion that once felt like a place of sadness was starting to feel like home, not just for Liam, but for her too. They both had lost something important, but in each other they had found a new kind of family. And so, Grace found purpose again. And Liam, at last, was discovering what it meant to be loved. One morning, Liam showed Grace a small folder filled with his drawings. He didn't say anything when he gave it to her, just quietly pushed it into her hands. Grace sat down with him and slowly began to look through the pages. Each drawing was simple but full of meaning. Most of them showed Liam with a woman beside him, clearly meant to be Grace. They were doing different things together. In one drawing, they were holding hands near a tree. In another, they were sitting on the grass with a book. But the one that caught Grace's attention was a picture of the two of them standing in front of a birthday cake. There were 2 candles on the cake, and both characters were smiling. Grace felt tears in her eyes as she looked at it. Without saying much, she got up, found some tape, and carefully hung the drawing on the wall in Liam's room. Liam watched her and gave a small, shy smile. Edward walked past Liam's room later that day. He paused for a moment outside the open door and saw the drawing on the wall. He didn't say anything and didn't step inside, but his eyes rested on the picture for several seconds. He noticed that Grace and Liam were spending more time together now. The boy was laughing sometimes, using more words, and even asking for food. These were things Edward hadn't seen in a long time. Still, he didn't know how to be part of it. He kept his distance, always watching from afar. He didn't stop Grace or question her actions, but he didn't join them either. He just kept working in his office, walking through the halls and observing small changes. Deep down, he felt something, but he didn't show it. He was afraid, confused, and unsure of how to reconnect. Even though Liam was improving, Edward didn't know where he fit in this new dynamic that was growing between his son and Grace. Later that week, Grace had a quiet conversation with one of the nurses while Liam rested in the garden. The nurse asked how Grace managed to be so patient and caring with Liam. Grace hesitated for a second, then slowly explained that her own daughter had passed away from cancer. Emily was also 7 years old when she died. Hearing herself say those words out loud brought a tight feeling to her chest. The memories were still painful, but they didn't come with the same sharpness as before. This time, along with the sadness, there was also a small feeling of hope. Maybe helping Liam was also helping her heal. The nurse listened quietly and nodded. Grace wiped her eyes and returned to Liam without saying anything else. She didn't like to talk about her past, but sharing a small piece of it reminded her that she wasn't alone in her pain. And somehow, being with Liam made her feel stronger, even on the hardest days. Liam, without even knowing the full story, seemed to understand her. He began to change slowly. His words became more frequent. He started saying things like, "More juice," "Book please," and even, "Thank you." These were small words, but they meant a lot. Grace responded to everything he said with a smile and calm encouragement. She gave him choices about what to eat, what puzzle to do, or what book to read. He responded well to that. His appetite improved. He started asking for snacks or meals, something he hadn't done in a long time. He even asked Grace to join him at the table sometimes. The other staff members noticed the change. The house, once quiet and still, began to feel different. There was movement, activity, and even laughter. Liam's eyes looked brighter and his cheeks less pale. He no longer sat at the window all day. He explored the house in his wheelchair, looking for Grace, calling her name, or just following her with curiosity. Most afternoons, Grace and Liam spent time together in the garden. It became their favorite part of the day. They would sit on a bench under a large tree, surrounded by flowers. Grace would bring books, puzzles, or just some juice and snacks for them to enjoy. Liam liked to watch the birds and sometimes tried to name the colors of the flowers. Grace helped him say the words, and every time he got one right, she smiled and clapped softly. They also started simple games, like counting the leaves or guessing animal sounds. These small moments were full of warmth. Sometimes Liam would rest his head on Grace's arm, and she would let him stay like that for as long as he wanted. Being outside made Liam feel more alive. Grace noticed it too. She felt peace there. It reminded her of afternoons she once spent with her own daughter. Now, those memories didn't hurt as much. They helped her feel close to Liam in a special way. For the first time in a long while, laughter filled the mansion again. It wasn't loud or constant, but it was real. Liam's soft giggles during their garden time, Grace's calm, happy voice as she read aloud, and the gentle conversations in the hallway brought a new kind of life to the house. The cold, lonely feeling that once covered every room started to fade. Grace had become more than just a housemaid. She was a source of comfort, not only for Liam, but for the whole atmosphere of the place. Even Edward, though still silent, began to feel the shift. The mansion, which used to be filled only with silence, now carried small moments of joy. Grace didn't think about the future too much. She focused on each day with Liam, making it better than the last. Liam, in turn, was discovering what it meant to live, speak, laugh, and connect. Together, they were slowly turning pain into healing, drawing strength from the memories they carried and the bond they now shared. On the day of Liam's birthday, the atmosphere in the mansion was quiet, but different from the usual silence. Grace had woken up early to prepare something special. She remembered the drawing Liam had made of a birthday cake with 3 candles, and she wanted to make that drawing real. In the kitchen, she gathered simple ingredients: flour, eggs, milk, sugar, and fruits. She worked carefully, mixing everything with patience. The cake wasn't fancy or big, but it was made with care. When it was ready, she placed pieces of fruit on top and added 3 candles, just like in the drawing. Meanwhile, Liam was in the living room, sitting in his wheelchair, looking calm, but with a small smile on his face. Edward stood in the background near the wall, watching everything without saying a word. The nurses stayed nearby, waiting. They all knew this moment meant something important. It was not just a birthday. It was a sign of life. When Grace entered the room with the cake, Liam's eyes lit up. His smile grew wider, something rare and precious. Grace placed the cake on the small table in front of him. There were no decorations, no music, and no loud celebration, but that didn't matter. Grace leaned slightly toward him and asked softly if he was ready. Everyone stood quietly around him. Edward continued watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. Grace lit the 3 candles, and the small flames flickered gently. Liam looked at the cake for a long moment, as if thinking. Grace encouraged him. "You can make a wish." Liam lifted his head, looked at Grace with tenderness, and spoke clearly. His voice was soft, but everyone heard. "I just wanted to live one more year with Mommy Grace." The room froze. The nurses covered their mouths. Grace felt her heart stop for a second. It was the most honest and pure wish she had ever heard. Grace immediately began to cry. She didn't try to hold back. She bent down, kneeled in front of Liam, and hugged him gently, careful not to hurt his fragile body. Her tears fell on his shoulder, but she didn't move away. Liam rested his hand on her back, as if reassuring her. The nurses also felt emotional and wiped their eyes silently. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, but full of love at the same time. Edward continued to watch, but his face remained the same. His arms were crossed and he didn't say anything. It was as if the moment belonged only to Grace and Liam. After a few seconds, Grace helped Liam blow out the candles. They didn't cheer, but the silence felt warm instead of empty. It was a birthday without loud voices, but with deep meaning. Grace could barely speak, but she stayed close to Liam, holding his hand while he smiled softly, still looking at the cake. After the birthday moment ended, the room slowly returned to calm. The nurses returned to their usual duties, though their eyes still looked emotional. Grace cleaned the small table and cut a piece of cake for Liam. He ate slowly, but he was happy. Edward left the room without saying anything, walking back to his office. Grace didn't judge him. She knew he didn't know how to express feelings, especially now, but she noticed how he had watched the whole time. She understood that even if he didn't speak, he had seen what happened. Later, as the day continued, Grace couldn't stop thinking about Liam's wish. "One more year with Mommy Grace." Those words repeated in her mind again and again. She realized that the bond between them had become real. It wasn't only a memory or a symbol, it was something living, something strong. Liam didn't see her just as someone who worked there. He saw her as part of his life. As evening came, Grace helped Liam get ready for bed. She lifted him gently from his wheelchair to his bed, adjusted his blankets, and checked that he was comfortable. Liam looked tired, but still peaceful. Grace sat beside him for a long while, just watching him sleep. She ran her fingers lightly through his hair, something she used to do with her daughter when she was sick in the hospital. The memory came back, but this time it didn't break her. It reminded her of love and care. She held Liam's hand softly, feeling its small, warm weight. The house was quiet again, but the silence didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like rest. Grace didn't move away. She stayed seated, just breathing and feeling present. She knew something inside her had changed. She didn't want to step back from Liam's life. She wanted to protect him, care for him, and be there for him. Something inside Grace had awakened that night. It wasn't just sadness or grief. It was strength. She remembered how she held her daughter's hand in her final days, promising she would not let her feel alone. Now, she felt the same promise forming again, but this time with Liam. She didn't say it out loud, but she felt it clearly. She would stay with him. She would not let him face his illness alone. She would be there in every moment she could, offering comfort, warmth, and presence. Liam breathed softly as he slept, his small hand still in hers. Grace remained there until her eyes grew tired, but she didn't let go of his hand. She finally understood that the connection between them was not accidental. It was something that life had brought to them both. And now, she was ready to protect him, just as she once protected her own child. Something inside her had changed. After hearing Liam's birthday wish, Grace couldn't forget his words. "I just wanted to live one more year with Mommy Grace." That sentence stayed in her mind day and night. She couldn't shake it off. It made her feel responsible, not because she was forced to help, but because she wanted to. She started spending her free time searching for medical information. Late at night, after Liam had fallen asleep, Grace would sit in the small corner of the house with her phone and look up every article she could find about treatments for children with advanced leukemia. She learned that Liam's case was very serious and that normal treatments were no longer working. But she also found a possible solution. A liver transplant could give him a real chance. It had to be a partial transplant, and the donor had to be a perfect match. The problem was that the waiting list was long, and the chances of finding a compatible donor were very low. Grace thought about it deeply and decided to take a bold step. Without telling anyone, she scheduled an appointment and went to a clinic in town to take the compatibility tests. She gave blood samples and answered all the medical questions. A few days later, the results came back. When she opened the envelope, she couldn't believe it. She was a match. Her liver could save Liam, but as she read further, the second part of the report gave her a shock. Grace had a hidden health condition, something silent and dangerous. The doctors explained that donating part of her liver would come with extreme risk. The surgery might cost her own life. She sat in the hallway of the clinic, holding the papers in her lap, trying to stay calm. Her hands were shaking, and her heart felt heavy. But even with the danger, she didn't feel fear. She felt a strange kind of peace. She had made up her mind. She was going to do it. She returned to the mansion with the medical file in her bag and a decision made in her heart. The next day, she asked to speak with Edward. He received her in his office, sitting behind his large desk as always. Grace stood calmly and handed him the documents. She explained everything: her research, the transplant, her compatibility, and even the risk. Edward didn't even look at the papers. He cut her off and said she was being dramatic. He accused her of trying to draw attention and using Liam's illness to get closer to the family. Grace was stunned. She tried to explain again, but he refused to listen. He told her that medical decisions were in the hands of professionals, not house staff. His words were cold and sharp. Grace left the room holding back tears. She had come with hope and left feeling humiliated. But she wasn't angry. She was disappointed. She thought he might care more. But clearly, she was on her own. Over the next few days, Grace tried speaking with members of the medical team. She approached one of the main doctors and tried to show her test results. But before she could finish, the doctor dismissed her, saying that unapproved surgeries were out of the question. Another staff member heard about it and spread the story through the mansion. Soon, some employees began to whisper behind her back. She overheard them saying she was pretending to be a hero. One nurse even said Grace was trying to feel important. Grace didn't respond to any of it. She kept working as usual, cleaning, cooking, and caring for Liam. But inside, she felt hurt. She wasn't looking for praise. She only wanted to help. And no one seemed to believe her. Still, she didn't let their judgment stop her. The more people doubted her, the more determined she became. She knew what she had read, she trusted her results, and she knew she was doing this for Liam. Grace quietly continued her plan. She contacted the same clinic and asked for a second opinion. The doctor confirmed again she was compatible and the surgery was possible, but risky. She asked about next steps and learned that she would need more tests, approval from a surgeon, and careful preparation. She started organizing it all without telling anyone in the mansion. She took short trips into town on her days off, pretending they were errands. In reality, she was attending appointments, signing papers, and meeting with specialists. She kept the documents hidden in her bedroom drawer, away from the eyes of curious staff. Liam had no idea what she was doing. He just continued being his usual quiet self, asking for books and puzzles, happy when Grace was near. Edward, as usual, kept his distance. Grace didn't bother telling him anything else. She had tried, and he didn't care. So now, she would continue alone, with no support, just the hope that maybe she could give Liam a real chance. Each night, Grace sat beside Liam's bed, like she always did. She looked at him sleeping, his breathing slow and soft. Sometimes his hand rested on hers, and she held it gently. She thought about her daughter and about the hospital nights when she had sat the same way, waiting and hoping. Back then, she had no power to save Emily. But now, she had a chance to save Liam. That thought kept her strong. Even though she was scared, especially after hearing about the risks, she never thought about giving up. She knew what she was doing. She knew her own body. She believed that even if the risk was high, it was worth it. Liam deserved a future. And if she had to face danger to give him that, she would. Something deep inside her had shifted since the day he called her Mommy. From that moment, she stopped thinking like a worker in the house. She started thinking like a mother again. And mothers protect, no matter what. Grace was not ready to give up. After days of being ignored and judged, she made another attempt to speak with the doctors working under Edward. She waited near the medical office inside the mansion and tried to approach one of the physicians during a break. But before she could even start talking, the head nurse stopped her. The nurse explained that she had direct orders from Mr. Blake. Grace was not allowed to be involved in clinical decisions. Any discussion about treatments, donors, or surgeries was off limits for her. Grace stood still, shocked and disappointed. The nurse didn't look happy about delivering the message, but made it clear that it wasn't up for debate. Grace felt helpless, as if the doors were being closed one by one. She was trying to help a child's life, Liam's life, and yet no one would listen. She left the hallway feeling defeated, isolated, and betrayed. It hurt more because it came from the very people who were supposed to care. That same night, Grace sat in her room, thinking deeply. She looked through Liam's medical papers and her own test results again. She needed help from someone who would take her seriously. After thinking for a while, she remembered someone, Dr. Helena, an old friend and a retired physician. Years ago, they had worked together at a small clinic. Grace hadn't spoken to her in a long time, but she decided to try. She made the call the next morning. Helena answered kindly and agreed to meet that afternoon. They sat in a quiet cafe, and Grace explained everything from the beginning: Liam's illness, her compatibility as a donor, the risk involved, and how no one in the mansion was supporting her. Helena listened closely, looked at the documents, and took her time before answering. She didn't promise anything, but she encouraged Grace to take the test results to an independent medical center. "Let them give you a real answer," she said. "At least then, you'll know you tried everything." 2 days later, she visited an independent transplant center in the city. The doctors there reviewed all the exams and conducted their own analysis. After several hours of tests, the final result confirmed what Grace already knew. The transplant was medically possible, but the risks for her were extremely high. Her hidden health condition made the surgery dangerous. There was a real chance she might not survive. Grace sat in the consultation room, holding the new results. She felt cold inside. She looked at the paper over and over again. There was no mistake. She could save Liam, but it might cost her life. She took a deep breath and quietly made her decision. She would do it. Her fear was real, but her love for Liam was stronger. She thought about how he called her mommy, how he smiled when she was around, and how he made his birthday wish. That was enough. Her mind was clear now. She was ready. With the new reports in hand, Grace decided to confront Edward one last time. She went straight to his office and knocked firmly. When he opened the door, she stepped in and placed the updated documents on his desk. She looked him in the eye and said clearly, "I'm going to donate part of my liver to Liam, with or without your approval." Edward stood silent for a moment, staring at her. Then he asked if she was threatening him. Grace stayed calm. She explained that she had taken the exams, spoken to outside doctors, and had everything prepared. She also said that if he tried to stop her, she would go public. She was ready to tell the media everything. Edward still showed no emotion. He didn't yell, but the tension in the room was strong. After a long pause, he finally nodded and said, "Fine." He gave his approval without showing any concern. Grace expected more, but she had what she needed. The surgery was officially scheduled. In the following days, Grace focused on getting everything in order. She spoke with a lawyer and handed over her personal documents, bank information, her will, and a letter with clear instructions in case something went wrong. She wanted to make sure Liam would be protected, no matter what happened. She gave the lawyer a sealed envelope, asking him to deliver it only if she didn't survive. Then she returned to the mansion, quieter than usual. She continued taking care of Liam as if everything was normal. He didn't know about the upcoming surgery. Grace didn't want to scare him or give him a burden to carry. She wanted his days to stay filled with peace, with books, drawings, and time in the garden. At night, when he was asleep, she sat by his bed as always. But this time, she looked at him with deeper intensity. She memorized every detail of his face. Her choice was made, and she had no regrets. Before the surgery date, Grace wrote a personal letter to Liam. She sat at the small desk in her room with a pen and paper. The words didn't come easily at first, but then they started to flow. She told him how much he had changed her life, how much he reminded her of her own daughter, and how proud she was of the boy he was becoming. She explained that sometimes love means taking risks, and that her decision came from the love she felt for him. She didn't want him to feel guilty or sad. She only wanted him to live. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "No matter what happens, I'll always be with you." She folded the paper carefully, placed it in an envelope and sealed it. She left it with the lawyer, along with her final instructions. Everything was ready now. Her mind was calm, and her heart was firm. Her fate was sealed. All that mattered now was giving Liam a future. The surgery was planned and carried out in complete secrecy. Only a few doctors and nurses knew the truth. Grace was taken to the hospital early in the morning, just as the sun was rising. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. Everything had already been arranged, and her instructions were clear. She had made sure Liam would be cared for and protected no matter what happened. Liam had been brought to the same hospital the night before, and was already under anesthesia. He didn't know Grace was going to be his donor. The staff followed the plan exactly as requested. There were no questions asked. Grace was taken into the operating room quietly. She wore a hospital gown and had no personal belongings with her. The medical team prepared both operating rooms, one for the donor and one for the recipient. Everything was ready. As the doctors began the long and delicate procedure, the hospital moved slowly, with focus and silence. It was the beginning of a day that would change everything. The operation took several hours. A large team of surgeons, nurses, and anesthesiologists worked non-stop. On Liam's side, things went smoothly. His small body responded well to the transplant, and the new part of the liver was accepted quickly. The doctors monitored his vital signs closely, and everything pointed to a successful result. On Grace's side, however, things were more complicated. From the beginning, the doctors saw signs that her body was struggling. Her heart rate was unstable, and her blood pressure dropped more than once. The silent health condition, she had made everything harder. The doctors kept working, doing everything they could to keep her stable. They managed to remove the liver portion and complete the transplant. But her condition became more serious by the minute. By the time Liam was taken to recovery, Grace was still in the operating room. Her heart went into distress, and then, after one final attempt to regulate her breathing and circulation, she suffered a cardiac arrest. The team acted fast. Doctors applied CPR. Nurses gave the necessary injections. A defibrillator was used more than once. There was no pause. No one gave up easily, but Grace's body couldn't fight anymore. Her heart, already weak from the effort, didn't respond. The lead surgeon called the time of death. The room went silent. Some of the staff stayed still, trying to understand what had just happened. Others quietly left the room to give space. Grace had given everything she had. She had kept her promise to save Liam. Her body was prepared and moved to another part of the hospital. A nurse was assigned to inform the lawyer listed in Grace's documents. Back in the recovery area, Liam was still asleep under the effect of anesthesia. His small body was resting, showing good signs. No one had the courage to say anything yet. They waited. They all knew he would ask for her. They also knew there was no easy way to tell him the truth. Hours later, Liam slowly woke up. He blinked a few times and looked around the room. His voice was weak, but he managed to ask for water. A nurse gave him a few sips and smiled at him. Then came the question, "Where's Grace?" His voice was soft, but it hit hard. The nurse looked down for a moment, then walked out to call the doctor. A few minutes later, Edward came into the room holding an envelope in his hand. He sat next to Liam's bed and handed him the letter. "She left this for you," he said. Liam opened it slowly, The paper inside was handwritten. Grace had written that she loved him very much and that the love he gave her was more powerful than any fear or pain. She wrote that he gave her a reason to live, and now she had given him a chance to keep living. Liam read every word carefully, holding the letter with both hands. Then, silently, he hugged it tightly to his chest. Edward didn't speak. He sat in the chair next to Liam and lowered his head. For a long time he didn't move. Then, quietly, tears began to fall. It was the first time he had cried in many years, not since his wife died, not since Liam got sick. But now, with Grace gone, something inside him broke. He realized how much she had done, how much she had changed the house, and how much she had given to his son. He remembered the days when Liam didn't speak, didn't smile, and didn't even move from the window. And he remembered how that started to change when Grace arrived. Her voice, her presence, her strength, they brought life back into a place that had been empty for too long. Now she was gone, and the silence returned. But it was not the same silence as before. It was full of meaning. Edward placed his hand gently on Liam's arm and stayed there, without a word, feeling everything he couldn't express. The mansion was quiet again. After the funeral, the staff returned to their usual routines, but the mood had shifted. No one spoke loudly, no one smiled easily. Grace's absence was felt in every hallway and every room. Her bedroom door stayed closed. Her name wasn't mentioned much, but everyone thought about her. Liam, now recovering at home, kept her letter close. He didn't let go of it. Sometimes he slept with it under his pillow. He began to eat better, speak more, and spend more time outside. He looked out the window less and chose the garden instead. Edward also changed. He started joining Liam during reading time. He stayed longer at home. They didn't talk much about what happened, but something new was growing between them. A quiet understanding. Grace had given everything she had, and because of that, Liam was alive. The mansion, though silent, now held something powerful. Liam's heart beat stronger than ever, and inside that silence, her love remained. A few days after the surgery, when the house had settled back into its slow routine, Edward made a decision. He walked through the halls of the mansion, passing rooms that once felt cold and quiet, and began to see them differently. The space that once only held luxury and silence could now serve a purpose. He started making calls. Within a week, a large part of the mansion was under renovation. Furniture was moved, rooms were emptied, and staff were reassigned. Edward officially announced the opening of a support center for children with cancer, right inside the mansion. He named it Casa Grace. The name was his way of honoring the woman who had changed everything. Grace had given her life to save Liam, and Edward wanted her memory to be more than just a photograph. He wanted her story to help others. Casa Grace would become a place of care, therapy, and hope for children going through the same pain Liam had faced. Edward also changed the way he behaved as a father. Before, he had always kept his distance, unsure of how to connect with Liam, but now something in him had shifted. He took time every day to sit with Liam, help him dress, or talk during meals. He started attending Liam's rehabilitation sessions, watching him carefully as he learned to move better, speak more, and eat without assistance. Liam was getting stronger, and Edward stayed close during every step. Nurses who once barely saw Edward now noticed how involved he had become. He no longer hid behind office doors or left early in the morning. He was there, present. Liam smiled more. He began asking for his father during the day, wanting him to see his drawings or help with puzzles. Their bond, once broken and distant, was beginning to heal. The man who had once ignored his son's pain was now the one pushing his wheelchair into the sunlit garden and sitting beside him, just listening. Liam also began drawing again. After the surgery, he slowly picked up his colored pencils and started making pictures like he used to. But this time, They were different. In nearly every drawing, Grace appeared. He drew her with a bright dress and long golden wings. Sometimes she stood beside him. Other times she watched him from the sky. In one drawing, she was holding his hand while he smiled. The nurses often saw him working on his drawings with deep focus. When asked who the woman was, he would answer with a smile, "That's my angel, Grace." He never forgot her. The walls of his room slowly filled with these pictures. Edward kept each one safe, even having a few framed. Liam's room was no longer filled with only silence and medical equipment. It was filled with color, memory, and love. Every time he finished a new drawing, he placed it near her photo and whispered, "A thank you." Grace had become part of his daily life. As the days passed, the story of Grace's sacrifice began to spread. It started with a small article in a local newspaper. The reporter had heard about the private liver donation and how a housemaid gave her life to save the child she cared for. The article included a photo of Grace and Liam together in the garden. Soon, other newspapers picked up the story. People began sending letters, flowers, and small gifts to the mansion addressed to Casa Grace. Local businesses offered support. Doctors and nurses volunteered to help. Donations came in, enough to build new therapy rooms and sleeping areas for visiting families. Edward, touched by this support, decided to do even more. In addition to the support center, he created a scholarship program. It was meant for single mothers who were caring for seriously ill children, just like Grace once did. He named it the Grace Fund. Every mother who received help would know her name and her story. Liam talked about Grace often. He didn't avoid the subject or seem sad when her name was mentioned. Instead, he smiled. He would tell the nurses stories about her cooking, about the books she used to read, and about the day she helped him finish his first big puzzle. Sometimes, he would speak about her like she was still nearby. "Grace wouldn't let me skip this," he would say with a laugh during therapy. He told new children at Casa Grace that she had saved his life. His words weren't heavy with pain. They were filled with love and pride. Before going to sleep each night, he placed her photo on the nightstand, looked at it and whispered, "Thank you." Then he would close his eyes and rest. Edward often stood quietly at the door, watching. He didn't interrupt. He knew those moments mattered. Grace's presence stayed in that room, not as a ghost, but as a memory that gave strength and comfort. Grace's love had done more than save Liam. It had opened something in everyone around her. Edward, once emotionally shut down, now used his wealth to support others. The staff, once distant, now worked with care and purpose. Nurses who had never spoken much to Liam were now his close friends. Families who visited Casa Grace found warmth, food, and comfort within those once cold walls. Liam was alive, and more than that, he was living. He drew, played, laughed, and healed. His life had changed completely, all because of what Grace gave. Every room in the mansion now had a sign of her legacy. A quote on the wall, a drawing by Liam, or a smile from a child she had never met but still helped. Grace had given everything, but what she left behind couldn't be measured. She had changed more than one life. She had changed many. Her love continued through Liam's heart, through Edward's actions, and through every child welcomed into Casa Grace. 6 months after the surgery, Liam made a big step in his recovery. He walked again. It wasn't easy, and he still needed help. His legs were weak, and he had to use a walker most of the time. But every step he took meant something. He had been through so much: sickness, treatment, surgery, and loss, but now he was moving forward. The therapists at Casa Grace cheered for him every time he stood up. Edward was always nearby, sometimes helping hold his arm or standing behind him to make sure he didn't fall. Liam didn't complain. He tried, even when he was tired or in pain. The doctors were impressed with his progress. He still had a long way to go, but he was determined. Everyone in the mansion saw how hard he worked. When his 8th birthday came, they organized a small party. Friends, staff, and some of the children from Casa Grace were there. Liam smiled, and when it was time to make a wish, he said something that moved everyone. Standing in front of the cake with everyone around him waiting for the usual birthday wish, Liam looked at the candles and said, "I want to live for me and for her." The room fell silent. No one asked who her was. They all knew. Edward stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Liam in a long hug. It was not a quick gesture, it was filled with feeling. The people at the party clapped gently, and a few wiped their eyes. Edward whispered something into Liam's ear, and the boy nodded with a small smile. That simple sentence was enough to show how deep Grace's presence still was in their lives. She was no longer there physically, but she was in their thoughts, their actions, and in the strength that Liam showed every day. The boy who once barely spoke now stood proudly in front of people, saying something that came from the heart. His words weren't just about memory, they were about purpose. Grace's story had become well known in town. People talked about her with respect and admiration. What she did, giving her life to save a child she loved, was something few could truly understand, but no one could ignore. The letter she had written to Liam was later shared by Edward with a local writer who turned it into a small book. The book told the story of love, loss, sacrifice, and healing. It was published and distributed to schools in the area. Teachers read it aloud in classrooms, and students discussed its message. Many of them had never heard anything like it before. For some children, it was their first time understanding what true sacrifice meant. Edward didn't ask for recognition. He didn't speak at events or try to promote the book. He just wanted Grace's words to reach others. That was her voice, her heart, and now it belonged to more than just Liam. Her message of love and courage was now touching many lives. Liam also wanted to do more. Inspired by everything Grace had taught him, through words, actions, and love, he began visiting hospitals. At first, Edward wasn't sure it was a good idea, but Liam insisted. He said he wanted to bring smiles to other kids who were going through what he had. So Edward arranged visits to nearby hospitals with the help of the Casa Grace staff. Liam didn't go empty-handed. He brought coloring books, small toys, and drawings he had made himself. His favorite drawings were of Grace with golden wings, which he called his angel collection. He gave one to every child he met. The kids loved him. His smile, his calm voice, and his story made them feel understood. Parents and nurses thanked him often, and he always said the same thing: "My heart, Mommy, taught me what life means." It became his way of remembering Grace, not with tears, but with action. By helping others, he kept her spirit alive every single day. Even though Grace was gone, she was present in everything Liam did. He still kept her photo on his nightstand. Every night, before sleeping, he whispered a quiet thank you to her. He believed she could hear him somehow. His room at the mansion had not changed much. The drawings were still on the wall, and her letter was stored in a special box he kept locked but close. Edward often entered the room quietly, just to sit near Liam and look at the drawings with him. They didn't always speak, but they shared the same understanding. Grace had given them both something they couldn't replace: connection, warmth, and a new chance. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was filled with memory, with meaning. Liam, though still healing, was growing stronger. He learned to read better, write small messages, and speak with confidence. He lived each day with intention. He knew that he wasn't just living his life, he was living hers too. As time passed, Liam continued to grow, but he never forgot his promise. His actions, his words, and his drawings were full of the love he had received. Grace had changed him forever. He didn't need reminders because he carried her in everything he did. He honored her memory by being kind, by helping others, and by living bravely. Edward, too, stayed close to his son. Their bond grew stronger every day. They both knew they had been changed by someone very special. Grace's legacy wasn't just in the building named after her or in the book read by children. It lived in the way Liam smiled, in the way he held the hands of sick kids, and in every step he took. That love didn't disappear, it moved forward with him. With every heartbeat, Grace continued to exist. Liam lived not just for himself, but for the woman who gave him everything. And through his life, she would never be forgotten. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.